Hello and welcome. While the world watches the crisis in Gaza, Washington is busy getting ready for the inauguration of President-elect Barack Obama, a man voted in on a promise of change as the nation became largely disillusioned with the Republican Party of George W. Bush. But the presidential campaign also revealed deep divisions within the party itself. This has left the Republicans doing some serious self-examination, looking for answers and seeing what they need to change before the next election cycle. Normally considered the stronger party on national security matters, voters roundly rejected 8 years of a neoconservative Bush foreign policy agenda. On domestic issues, Republicans are divided over immigration and key civil rights issues such as detentions without trial and wiretapping without warrants. When it comes to government itself, many of the GOP's faithful are bitter over what they see as their party's abandonment of Reaganism in favor of big government, big spending. With the cyclical nature of power in Washington, we look at the fight for the heart of the Republican Party and what it means for U.S. policy and the world. Now remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE and enter the chat room to take part. We also welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, joining us to debate the future of the Republican Party is one of the key leaders of the center-right movement, Grover Norquist, who is also the president and founder of Americans for Tax Reform. He feels there's a desperate need for a return to the Republican Party of the late President Ronald Reagan. His latest book is Leave Us Alone, Getting the Government's Hands Off Our Money, Our Guns, Our Lives. Also here in DC with me is another leading conservative, but with a different perspective, David Frum, a former special assistant and speechwriter to President George W. Bush and now resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. David's also author of Comeback, Conservatism That Can Win Again. Well, let's get to our debate. Gentlemen, I welcome you both back to the show.
Thank you. Sure.
Grover, if I could start with you first, please. In his final week of office, of course, everyone's looking at the legacy of President George W. Bush, and what they're seeing is the terrible state of the U.S. economy, the stalemate in Iraq. You know, there was the unpopular bailouts, of course, here, and the banks and big business getting bailouts. Stalemate in Iraq, Afghanistan, still a big problem. The crisis over Israel's war in Gaza now, of course, and America, again, getting a bad rap for being in a very isolationist position here. What's this doing for the reputation of the Republican Party? What sort of challenge does it face you?
Well, it's a tremendous challenge for George Bush's reputation. The Republican Party has started the process of divorcing itself from George Bush's legacy, which can be summed up as a failure on just about every imagined measure you want. The Republican Party is stepping back and saying he was for these massive spending increases. Now, some Republicans voted for them. We had today a congressman and two senators who were at a meeting we held this morning at the Wednesday meeting who were talking about, you know, some of us cast some pretty dumb votes being loyal to George Bush, and we were in the process of extricating ourselves from Bush's massive spending increases, new government programs, and all the various things he had the government doing that the government wasn't capable of doing, and he wasn't capable of stopping from happening. He cheerled for some of it. So part of it is doing what we should have done with Hoover. Hoover was the Republican who opened the door for FDR to do everything dumb that Hoover did on a bigger scale. And our friend President Bush did a whole bunch of very bad and destructive things, and he left the door open for bigger destructive things by the Democrats now.
All right, we'll flesh out some of these arguments in a minute, but David Frum, good to have you with us here as well. Now, of course, many people say George Bush made a number of key mistakes, but among many conservatives, there's still the feeling he did get a lot right. Now, there was a comment here I want to quote to you from Fred Barnes in the Weekly Standard, referring in this case to the relationship with America's relationship with Israel, and of course considering the Gaza situation right now. And Fred Barnes said, Bush announced that Ariel Sharon should withdraw the tanks he'd sent into the West Bank in 2002, then exerted zero pressure on Sharon to do so. And he backed the wall without endorsing it as an official boundary while knowing full well that it might eventually become exactly that. He was a loyal friend to Israel. So I wonder what is America eventually going to have to pay a price for its special relationship with Israel in the face of so much malcontent or discontent from other countries, other nations?
In a word, no. The driver that did so much damage to the Republican Party and to George Bush in this last election, I think the reason that there's now a Democrat on his way to the White House is this simple data point, which is the core of everything you need to know about American politics. What you need to know about how a party is going to do is what happened to the median personal income in that country over the period before the election. In 2007, before the financial crisis, before the Wall Street crash, the average American, the median American, the one in the middle, after inflation, was earning less money than they were earning in the year 2000. Now, that's not the whole of American politics, but it's so close to being the whole that it might as well be the whole. And this is why we can't offload all the responsibility for what's happened onto George Bush, because the failure of the Republican Party to generate policies that would raise the income of the typical American worker, that was not just George Bush's fault. It was not just George Bush who advocated, for example, the open-door immigration policy that put so much pressure on the wages of low-income workers. It was not just George Bush who said that the emphasis should be always on reducing one particular tax, the federal personal income tax, and who disregarded the health care problem. These are the key facts at home. Now, they're not the whole of the story, but they're very, very close to being the whole of the story.
But of course, it goes to more than just that median income. It comes down to America's relationship with the rest of the world, its relationship, in this case now, of course, the whole issue with Gaza is becoming a very serious one.
I promise you, that's not why the Republicans lost the election in 2008.
Fair enough. Now, it's interesting, both of you tend to call yourself conservatives rather than use the word Republican, from what I can tell.
I happily use the word Republican.
Grover, you tend to call yourself a conservative rather than Republican.
Well, I'm center-right, and I'm certainly very active in the Republican Party. I hosted and moderated the debate between the 6 gentlemen who are running for Republican National Committee chairman. The Republican Party is the central vehicle through which modern conservatism, center-right activism takes place. So there are guys who go, I'm a conservative, I'm not a Republican, in order not to be responsible for anything that goes on in the real world. But that's not a particularly useful project.
Interestingly enough, Barack Obama just had dinner with a number of leading conservatives, and he seems to be quite engaging across party lines, which is unusual. It's obviously less common within the Republican or conservative circles. How do you regard the fact that he is quite inclusive?
Well, you should talk to everybody. And of course, George Bush's position on not talking to anybody doesn't just include foreign countries with which you have differences. He didn't talk to the McCain people. He didn't hire McCain people after he beat McCain, whereas Obama is bringing in the Hillary Clinton people. I mean, so there are a series of challenges there. Obama is doing well, something Bush did not do, and that is talk to everybody. Talking to everybody doesn't mean agreeing with everybody, and sitting down with somebody else doesn't mean you're going to give away the store. But not to talk to people is to remain stupid.
What about the actual policies, David? On how far has the Republican Party strayed from its core values, its original mandate, or its original promises?
Well, we need to distinguish between values and policies. The Republican Party is the party of freedom, the party of markets, the party of growth, hope, growth, and opportunity, the phrase of the Reagan years. I think all of us in the Republican Party, Grover and I, would both heartily endorse all of those principles and values. Now we have a problem of, well, how do you make those principles and values real? How do you make them operational? And you have to begin with the problems of the day. And I think where we're really going to have an argument at the Republican Party is a lot of people say, not only do we need to hold on to our eternal principles, but we need to return to the policies of the 1980s. I think people on my side of the argument say the policies of the 1980s were solutions to the problems of the 1980s. Okay. If we have new problems, we need new solutions, which means new policies.
How does that stand with you? That perhaps the Reaganism, the Reagan republicanism, is out of date?
No, because Reaganism was not about a specific tax cut. 1978, people were concerned about raising property taxes, and so the taxpayer revolt was a property tax revolt. Then it shifted over to income taxes. Throughout the states, we've had sales tax revolts, efforts on not taxing the internet. Trying to keep taxes down is something that it shifts around. You have different pieces to the puzzle. The Democrats are insisting on taking taxes back to Bill Clinton level of taxation. So I keep an Al Hunt file. Al Hunt's a left of center journalist who explains every 6 months that the Republicans should stop talking about taxes, not because he wants us to win, but because he wants us to lose. And so you constantly have, stop talking about taxes. If you don't say no to tax increases, you never get to a conversation about spending restraint. Step 1, don't raise taxes. Step 2, spending restraint. The Bush people didn't even focus on step 2.
David, there's an email that we got in from Canada, from Jean Campbell in Alberta, who wrote in saying, while I don't believe the Republican Party will come back for some time, it does need a great leader if it is to come back at all. Who is sitting in the wings? Now, who do you think can be charismatic enough to lead the Republican Party now?
I think one of the problems that Republicans have is that they tend to think that the answer to their problems is a who. rather than a what. And so this is much more than the Democrats a leader-driven party. And I think that email expresses a common view. I think it's a mistaken view. I think you have to begin by coming up with some policy remedies, and then you'll find your leader. And I think there's a real danger that a lot of Republicans are going to say, well, look at Sarah Palin. She got a lot of crowds excited. Maybe she is our next great charismatic figure. Without much regard to, can she actually run the office? I mean, the presidency is ultimately an administrative job, not just a rhetorical one. And we can be too focused on that question. I think the answer is a what, not a who.
Has the GOP failed to listen to its constituents then?
The GOP's problem is, as our constituency is shrinking. And so too much attention to our core constituency can cut us off from the rest of the country. And so there are a lot of times when Republican leaders are saying things that the Republicans, that dwindling portion of the population, like, and that the rest of the population doesn't like. The object is to get to 51%, not just to satisfy your 28%.
All right, we'll look at some of those changing demographics in a moment. We're going to take a very short break here. More of our discussion in a moment. And as we pause, let me remind you, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com, enter the chat room. You can see there's a debate taking place there now, and we'll be right back.